we're really lucky to have two great architects, Denise Leroux from Denise the Architects and David Cunningham from DCAP. Both are here who can help guide us on how are we dealing with renovations and planning for it as we think about buying. And then last but not least, we have JR from Narrows Management. Narrows manages about 1,800 units in Brooklyn. So JR is kind of on the front line in terms of dealing with a lot of the the effects of living, transacting, while taking care of 1,800 units, people's Q&A on how do we make sense and how do we operate in this. So I think it'll be great to get all of our perspectives. What we wanted to cover very briefly was just have a quick update on the market. What are we seeing literally over the last current 30 days or 7 days? And then really focus more on what is the new normal of this buying process, specifically like how are we looking to buy. We'll have another session in a few weeks about what it's like to sell and market. And so I think we want to give you a quick overview of how are we going about buying in this current market with our clients. And then really the last half hour, we'd like to spend more on Q&A because I think that's where we can draw upon any of your questions. We have a lot of questions already from folks. So feel free to drop in your questions in the chat box, and then we will start addressing them towards the later half of that. So I'm gonna, I think if we could switch, I don't know, are we showing the screen of, I'm gonna share my screen. Mike, can you take off your, okay, great. Let me just give you a very quick overview of what's going on in the marketplace. Before I share my screen and some stats, what's interesting is, okay, let's face it, we are going to have a second quarter that is going to have negative growth. Technically, we'll be in a recession. It is a buyer's market, but it is also a very subjective market. It's the old adage of New York. It depends on inventory, the level of competition and supply is what determines pricing. And one of the things that I think is really helpful to take note is how is the market behaving from sector to sector. So a slide I'll share with you is if you look at literally as of today, like Thursday, in the last 30 days, let me just give you a sense of what the numbers look. Share my screen. Sorry, can you see this?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so if we take a look at, over the last 30 days, if you think about and we cover 30 Brooklyn neighborhoods. So what do you have on the horizontal columns is, the columns, we have 30 Brooklyn neighborhoods, the data for the 30 Brooklyn neighborhoods, and how does it compare with all of Manhattan? When you look at active and new listings, currently, over the last 30 days, there's about 2,725 units in Brooklyn, the 30 Brooklyn neighbors we monitor, and of which 399, about 400 are new listings. As you compare with Manhattan, there's about over 6,500 units, and out of which about close to 600 are new listings. Over the last 30 days, we've seen about 139 units get into contract in the Brooklyn hoods, and about 194 in Manhattan. And in terms of sold and closed, we are closing. That's the interesting thing. And John and Todd can talk about, and JR as well, and how we're doing virtual closings. So there's about 337 closings in Brooklyn and about 484 in Manhattan. I think where the trends really show is if we think about the absorption rates. And generally, when we think about absorption rates, basically it shows us a sort of the velocity in the market. How quickly are properties getting sold or in contract relative to what's on the market. General benchmark that the industry uses is when you have a 15%, less than 15% absorption rate, it translates to a buyer's market. When it's over 20%, we consider it to be a seller's market. Now, when you look at the sold versus active in Brooklyn 30 hoods over the last 30 days, the absorption rate is 12%. That's pretty high. Relative to Manhattan, which is almost half of that. That really shows how these 30 Brooklyn hoods are actually commanding more interest and has so periodically. The deals are in Manhattan. In Brooklyn, it's based on neighborhoods and property type. When you factor that in also the in contract, when you say 12% plus 5 in contract, the in contract listings in Brooklyn is actually moving at a higher rate than in Manhattan. And where really it kind of drills home the point of what the current situation is in 30 Brooklyn neighborhood is that currently there's a higher rate of properties going into contract than coming onto market. Now that number is obviously inflated because new inventory is low and people aren't putting them on, and they will the moment doors open. So we expect that to be lower, but I think the key takeaway here, and what I want to drill home is that when you're looking to buy in this market, in Brooklyn, in the top 30 Brooklyn neighborhoods, what we're noticing, and we'll share a case example because we had a buyer get into contract on a property yesterday. It is case by case in terms of price negotiability. There is a substantial amount of demand and properties are getting into contract faster than you would think. And it is still a competitive market. However, there are deals there. So, it's hard for me to say we are in a strong buyer's market because they're actually, we'll share a case example where a client of ours bought a property that was 10K above ask yesterday. So I think it does help us to kind of really talk a little bit more about, okay, in this climate where it's very subjective, what is the new normal in the buying process? And if I could just give you a quick sketch, Helen, if you want to share the overall step-by-step process, what has changed for us right now is typically you'd see a property and then make a bid. And
do you guys see it there?
I don't see it, actually.
I don't see it.
Apologies.
That's fine. So typically, if we walk through the process flow of what we go through in terms of buying, we'll share the process flow. But generally, you'd see the property first and then make a bid. Now, that's one of the last things we do. And in fact, John and Todd can speak about contracts we're doing where, where it's also subject to seeing the property post-contract. We even have a deal where the inspection is post-contract, and depending on the inspection, the buyer could withdraw from the contract. One of the key things here is that when it comes to risk, the market risk is shifting. The sellers are taking a lot more risk now because we are entering into contracts subject to viewing a property or subject to not only just appraisals, but also an inspection. So there is a shift in how we're doing deals. And if you look at a typical flow, you find an agent, you go get pre-qualified with Sunny, then go visit properties, make an offer, then do the due diligence, then do the inspection, and then sign a contract. Well, now that's not the case. So what we have seen, and where I think you have an advantage over others, is we can plan ahead. We are actually having a lot of our buyer clients put an offer sheet together, put an offer into a place before seeing it, and then opening doors with the sellers. And that's a complete shift. And now going forward, do we see that changing when doors open? Yes, but not really, because I think long gone are the days of open houses where you have 20, 30 people. So I think we're seeing a lot more virtual viewings. We're also requiring a lot of our buyers on properties we market to submit their offers, pre-vet them, the financials before let them through the door. So I think that is a huge shift. And I think that is going to stay, and we need to retool ourselves. So as a team, we've actually retooled, and we're working with every client, and we're using some tools that I think help us manage the process better. Because one of the things I mentioned is, and Mike can give our Instagram link, starting tomorrow, every 7 days on Instagram, we'll do a 7-day market watch. The 30-day market watch we'll share with our monthly market updates. But we're actually going to start doing a 7-day market watch of 30 Brooklyn neighborhoods in Manhattan. And I think it's a good way to see and keep an active pulse on, because if you're actively looking to buy right now, there are deals there, but you kind of really, and I'm not selling our services, but I'm saying you do need somebody to have an active pulse of what's going on. And also, because there's a lot of pent-up demand, we're seeing rapid absorptions. I feel like efficient tools in how you search and navigate is really key. So I'm going to kind of have Maria give you a quick overview. We've got a tool called Collections that is real time. It's a collaborative tool that I think only Compass has, and it's worth giving you a quick sketch over it. Then call us. We'll kind of show you how to use it. But it's actually a very useful resource to have. So Maria, give us a kind of an overview of how does this work?
Sure, real quick. Thank you, Raz. And thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it. Some of you may already have a head start and know our collections tool. But as Raz said, now it's even more important, especially since we have the stay-at-home order and we're not able to physically go and see properties. Our collection tool is a visual collaborative tool. And basically, we work with you to set up a search criteria, and it feeds into this collection. And there's different buckets up here that show pending client review. You can take a look at those listings. If it's something that you like, you can drop it into your favorites bucket. The big thing is just being super collaborative. We're able to, if you scroll down a little bit, if you see a listing that you don't like, you're able to trash it or say you're not interested. If you see a listing that you love and you want some more information on that listing, then you can just click the comments button and then you can type your comments in there. Also, if you dig down a little deeper, if you click on a listing, you're able to find an incredible amount of knowledge on the listing. This collection happens to be set up for me. I just did kind of a fake collection with 2-bedroom, 2 baths in Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, and Prospect Heights. Condos only that range between 1.2 million and 1.7. So as you look down here, you'll be able to see information like days on the market, taxes. Even further down, and I don't want to belabor this too much, there's information, I'll give you a description, and then there's a lot of building information. So a lot of your search, everything can be really almost done, except for obviously, that last physical viewing online. And Compass allows us to have, this amazing search tool called Collections. The great thing also is we can set it up so that it can alert you, whether it's immediately, whether it's daily, if there's been listing changes, like if you've seen a price change or if you've seen new listings come to market. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this off the screen so that we can go back and look at the collection a little bit better. Okay, there we go. So again, what I was saying is that we can set it up so that we have very timely information for you. And we can set it up, so you can see things immediately, daily, weekly, whatever kind of suits your needs. So for us, we think this is a game changer. It kind of gives, I think, our clients an edge in a home search, especially in an environment right now that we're in.
Great. Thanks, Maria. I think what I wanted to do also is, as we talk about the new process, I don't know, Helen, if you want to share a case example of what we witnessed with a buyer in a Brooklyn market in terms of the price negotiability. And I think we'd kind of tie in our partners to speak a little bit about how we're going through the process.
Yeah, so that is a key now in this current climate. How do we get doors open? And it's a lot trickier than you would think. But basically, just to give you some backdrop on this particular deal that we just went into contract on today, the buyers, the property was actually launched just before the shutdown, and they had 40 visitors and more at their first open house. So the seller was very, very encouraged, really felt that they had priced it right and that they were going to get into a bidding war. And they were really looking for $50K above ask, and priced it that way. So when the stay-in-place orders came down, obviously everything has shut down, and for a while they just kind of dialed it back. Now our buyers have been very diligent on collections, and we have been collecting due diligence from buildings and inquiring into doing all that work in advance. And the way we got the doors open in this particular one is we basically had to pull everything together in advance. In other words, we put together almost a full financial package. That's usually something that's reserved for the end, but we did it in reverse. And we put it all together, tied up nice, and really just gave the seller a lot of confidence that our buyers were not only qualified but motivated as well. And that's a very, very important thing these days to convey to a seller to get the doors open. As it turned out, the sellers, having figured that they were going to get like 50K above ask, we wound up having to negotiate with them nonetheless. So we wound up, our sellers actually wound up paying 10K above ask, which is still a whole lot better than 50K above ask, which is surely where they were headed if there were not this lockdown. So kind of a win-win situation for both parties. And anyway, so some of the things that we've had to do in that respect is, again, preloading all the information and getting sellers to open their doors based upon heavy vetting of buyers and presenting them in the best light possible. Now, we had also talked a bit about how contracts are shifting to favor buyers a bit more. And maybe, Todd, you can give us a sense of some of the provisions are in contracts now that specifically address how we navigate this?
Sure, and I just want to add, incidentally, on this deal that we got into contract, Todd and Seth and John were the attorneys, so they were the ones who got it done.
What we've been doing since, I guess, late March, early April, is including in our purchaser riders, whether it's a house, condo, or a co-op, is a COVID provision that affords the transaction more time if necessary, but it also allows the buyer an out, similar to a mortgage contingency, if at the time they go into contract, they're employed and they meet the criteria for their lender, but if during the pendency of the contract, their situation changes to the point where the lender can no longer do the funding, it gives them an out to cancel the contract and get their deposit back. Most, if not all, attorneys have been, sellers' attorneys have been accommodating, obviously, in allowing it. We've also, in deals that were already in contract, let's say in December, January, and early February, before the severity of the pandemic hit, is adding a addendum to the contract for COVID for the existing contracts. Those we were able to push through and get into contract, some depending upon the seller's attorney or the original on or about date. We were not, but we haven't had an issue whereas it presented a problem for our buyers. As I mentioned earlier before we went on, we also have seen management companies, obviously especially on the co-ops, be more forthcoming with giving us their sacred due diligence materials, most notably the board minutes. We actually were in the process of and always requested beforehand, before COVID, of seeing if they could email us minutes, and we would sign a waiver and a release that we wouldn't share it with anybody, just because it simply would save time, so we don't have to send somebody to a management company and coordinate that. So some management companies have been pretty good at sending us now PDFs of the board minutes, and they've been pretty accommodating as well in allowing us to close the co-ops virtually and in the form of escrow, whereas they would send us, and they now do send us, the stock and lease originals beforehand. But back to the original question is, yeah, we have been negotiating in our contracts COVID language that if a deal cannot close in time, or if a deal looks like it's going to delay 45 to 60 days past the on or about date, that it affords buyers more time, but also it affords them protection should their financial situation change during the pendency of the contract as a result of COVID. So I think most people have been pretty accommodating in allowing it. It hasn't really presented us with any problems. We have seen that some co-ops are not reviewing applications with the same diligence as they had in the past. I think we've had in the last month 2 buyers on co-ops get their down payments back because of, I think it's paragraph 6.3, whereas if the co-op does not render a decision within 30 days after the closing date. And some co-ops have just been either really slow or have just, depending upon the size of their boards, have just completely stopped reviewing applications. So we have had people who've had to get out of contracts because of that. So some provisions which normally haven't been applicable, like that 6.3, have now come to light. But for the most part, the COVID language has been pretty beneficial.
Todd, I want to bring JR into this because JR, I mean, you manage so many buildings. In the co-ops, just in light of what Todd's saying, how are the boards handling, and also you're handling not only the due diligence closings, also the interviews. What are some things you're seeing?
So as far as the due diligence, we also pretty early on created a disclosure, a waiver, so that we could email minutes out to attorneys to do their checking up on the co-ops. Most co-ops were okay with it. Some co-ops still didn't want to. Some boards still didn't want to share them electronically, and we dealt with that. As far as the way in which we're dealing with interviews, for the large majority of our buildings, they're doing virtual interviews. They're doing them either by Zoom or conference call. Mm-hmm. Have buildings that met. I have a building that met somebody outside. They all wore masks and stood 6 feet apart, and they interviewed because they felt it was, I still have people who still have board members who really feel like that face-to-face meeting is important. Personally, I'm very happy when they can interview by a conference call. It takes away a whole layer of issues. When they are just on the phone with each other and can't see each other, it's fine with me, as long as the board is comfortable with it. As far as transactional stuff, we don't see a big difference right now in, getting stock certificates signed and recognition agreements signed. What we have seen is a nice cooperation with attorneys and board members, where they're sort of cutting out the middleman, which is the management company, and kind of dealing directly with each other to answer questions and to do that. That's something we've seen a little bit different since this started. But yeah, we haven't had a big issue. We haven't had a big issue with transactional stuff during this time. Most of our boards have been very, welcoming to different methods. Attorneys have been very patient with boards. We have a couple of buildings that aren't comfortable doing interviews yet, virtually or otherwise, and we get it. It's not a management decision; it's an individual board decision. But for the most part, it hasn't been too big of an issue. I think going forward, I think more interviews and more meetings and annual meetings. I think they are going to turn more virtual. I think this has just kind of showed everybody that you can meet, over the computer and get work done the same way as sitting in a room. Great for me, so.
And that's one of the things we're seeing, as we said, like we see a sort of an inflection point on digitizing a lot of these processes. Are there anything else, JR, in buildings? Like, we've seen a lot of people asking for units with washer and dryer in unit. Are there things you're seeing in house rules or in being inside a building and how you're adapting or changing because of COVID?
So I think in the beginning, when this first started, what I thought was our biggest job was to, secure supplies, secure hand sanitizers, secure bleach, secure the things that were really difficult to find. And I think that was the focus in the first few days, a big one. And then, you wanted to also for the buildings, make sure that they were being disinfected every day, and the high touching areas had a daily. And if you had buildings, we have a lot of buildings that aren't big and don't have a super on premises. So we were sort of securing the work of extra cleaning company people who would come, every day and things like that. And then it transitioned to sort of the rules and regulations of the building, delivery people, how far could they go in, I think that right now what we've seen some differences is in laundry room usage. I think that a lot of the buildings have adopted a rule of either 1 or 2 people allowed to use a laundry room at a time. Gyms of course have been closed for the most part. We're starting to look at the future and what it's going to look like in 6 months or a year or 2 years, and that includes signage. It includes also daily cleaning. How long we're gonna keep doing the high touch area disinfectant. We want to make sure that all the buildings have hand sanitizers in the lobby. As far as the way business is conducted within our office, we don't know. We have to see how it really plays out. To some extent, it could go back to normal where board meetings are still held in a year. They'll be back in the buildings or in people's apartments. But I think that's a big question. I also know I had a conversation today with somebody from the fire department enforcement unit that they're putting into place sort of violations and enforcement of mask issues and sort of all that kind of thing, and trying to stay on top of that because before it becomes rules, you want to know about them so you can warn the people in the building. I think I can answer any other questions about sort of doing, but
I mean that's helpful. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just quickly, when it first hit and we were having condos and co-ops closed for purchasers, buildings weren't allowing move-ins or move-outs, but we were closing and just requesting that seller's attorney hold, adequate escrow pending a final walkthrough when the buildings were being available for move-ins and move-outs. Now, it's not as much because buildings are opening up a little bit and allowing either an agent of the buyer or the buyer themselves to conduct the walkthrough, obviously with nobody present and, using precautions. I mean, for townhouses, it's not the same because there's no, building, but we have seen a strict shift from, I guess, no walkthroughs to holding escrows to now actually being able to do on condos and co-ops, a proper walkthrough prior to closing. So that's easing a little bit, which is, I guess, good.
Got it. I want to kind of ask David a question. David, how are you, given this, how are you planning for renovations for clients? What are factors going in? Is DOB taking your permits? How are you handling the current situation right now with clients?
Well, I think it depends on where you are in your project, but if you wanted to start a project today, you can. We've been working with a number of our clients. So we prepare drawings for them and we meet like this. We share the screen, we review the drawings. So in terms of our work, we've continued to work. The Department of Buildings is doing pretty well, actually. They've already moved. They had a significant amount of their work that you could handle online before the crisis. And there were a number of things that you still had to do in person. Well, a lot of those have been also shifted online. The one thing you can't do right now is construction unless you're declared, unless you're classified as essential, which most residences wouldn't be. So construction is stopped. And I think once things sort of settle down, there'll be a big crunch to get permits and things like that. And that could slow things. I think people will have trouble starting construction. But as far as design and getting approvals, you can do all that. We're working on all that pretty regularly right now.
Got it. No, thanks for sharing that. Because when we think about buying, a lot of our clients are looking at properties that are in renovations, and part of the question we get asked is, would it cost more now because you'll have a longer time of holding the property in terms of renovation process. So I mean, it's good to hear that the DOB is doing well. And speaking of valuations and properties, I want to shift gears to on the finance side because for a lot of our clients on the call here, one of the reasons to buy right now is the rates are low, but it's also an interesting lending climate. So we have Sunny from Citizens, and we also have Len and Rick on on sort of the tax and accounting side. But I want to first ask Sunny, what are you seeing in terms of, this new world for buyers from a lending environment? What are the changes you're seeing? How are you handling it? How are appraisals being done? If you could kind of share that with us, that would be helpful.
Sure. Thank you for having me on. The lending landscape has become a bit more stringent since COVID began. I think most lenders, if not all lenders, have kind of revisited their guidelines. So you're going to probably see various different changes, amongst different banks. As far as Citizens Bank goes, at least on the purchase side of things, we've kept most of our guidelines pretty similar. We haven't made any big changes, but, we are more keen in looking at assets and income documents, even up to closing. So even up to closing, we're doing employment verifications. We're getting affidavits signed to make sure that they still have their jobs, they're still making the money that they're making, and things like that. So, as crazy as it sounds, I mean, there are, loans that are approved all the way through, and then it could be that a day or two before the closing, somebody could actually get a denial, right? If they either got furloughed or they lost their job or something like that. So that's very different than what we've been dealing with in the past. So I think, loan officers are a lot more hands-on. I'm talking to my customers probably 10 times more throughout the process than I've been before. And I welcome that. I tell all of the borrowers that they have to be a lot more diligent today. You have to ask more questions. You do have to follow up more often. That's kind of the biggest change I'm seeing from a day-to-day perspective.
Got it. Question for you and also Len and Rick. With the CARES Act, one of the things we heard is that, you can take money out from your 401k without a tax penalty. Can you both kind of from a tax perspective, is that true? What are the other benefits, Len and Rick, from the CARES Act that a buyer may have? And then Sunny, for you, how would you view a buyer or if they were to take a significant chunk from that was allowed from their 401k in terms of their eligibility? So I want to go with Rick and Len first. What are your feedback on the CARES Act and the impact on taxes and sort of taking money out of your 401k?
Sure. So this is Len. So thanks again for having me on. It's very nice to be here with all of you. Let me deal with your first question first, and that is you can certainly take out money from your qualified pension plan without the 10% penalty. The problem is that it has to be what's known as a coronavirus-related distribution. So if you simply want to get the benefit of withdrawing those funds early without the penalty and then having the favorable repayment scheme, you can repay it over 3 years to purchase property, right? It's very unlikely that kind of a distribution for that purpose is going to qualify as coronavirus related. Now, you have to certify to the plan administrator that the distribution you're taking is in fact coronavirus related in order to get that benefit, avoid that 10% penalty. So it's really on the honor system. I mean, the plan administrators don't have the time or the resources to investigate the hardships that you're suffering in claiming this coronavirus related distribution. But the reality is, you're certifying to something, you're promising. And so if you want to use those funds to buy property, then it's not going to be a coronavirus related distribution, virtually certain. And so you're going to be subject to the usual penalty and the tax. So I think that's quite inadvisable unless, again, you have circumstances that really qualify as coronavirus related. So you need to care for a loved one, or you yourself are sick, you've lost your job, your house is being foreclosed, you need the money for a down payment for something else, right? Then you might have a colorable claim. So I would be very cautious in taking money out of your qualified plan and calling it coronavirus related when it's not. And then your second question about the CARES Act and its just overall impact. So I think we can all rest easy in the sense that it hasn't changed the real estate landscape. The CARES Act from a policy perspective was really enacted to help businesses, ideally small businesses, although we've seen in the news that some bigger businesses have been benefiting, much to everyone's consternation. So the landscape for real estate remains largely unchanged. I mean, Rick might have a contrary thought or two, or perhaps I
would never argue with you, Len.
Oh, there we go. Good. So, so you still have the same old stalwarts for deferring capital gains, for example, from the sale of property. You still have a good old 1031 exchange that can be used. And one interesting nuance that's worth mentioning, I think, is that there is an extension that the IRS has provided. We all, I think, are at least peripherally familiar with the timing of 1031 exchanges. It tends to be pretty sensitive. So you have 45 days to identify a replacement property and then 180 days to close on it. So the IRS has extended deadlines to July 15th for any 1031 exchange deadlines that arise in the COVID-19 period. So you'd have to look at your particular transaction when you gave up your relinquished property and where you are in the replacement property identification and closing process. You may not have to adhere strictly to those timelines that the IRS has established. So there's some additional flexibility there.
On the timelines, how much flexibility? Because that's always a key question for a lot of our buyers on like, how do we adhere to the 6 months, especially now when we don't know when things will open. We don't know when new inventory will come up. Do you have a sense of what that could be?
Sure. Yeah. So let me just say this about that. So the extension that the IRS provided by notice says that if your deadline, whether for identification or for replacement, falls between April 1st and July 15th, the deadline is July 15th. So if you had to identify, if your 180-day period ended, on April 2nd, your deadline is July 15th. Okay. So similarly for your closing period, right? So you have that, and then there's just two things I would add. One, the IRS may well extend it again by notice because the tax deadline, as I think we all know, has been pushed to July 15th. And that deadline is softening now too. There's talk of pushing that deadline again. So concomitantly, it stands to reason that the 1031 related deadlines will also be pushed. And then there's the fallback. There's a what's known as a revenue procedure from about 13 years ago that provides a 120-day extension in connection with disaster areas. However, the IRS, in conjunction with that procedure, has to issue a supplemental notice that says, yes, now properties in this area are in a disaster area for purposes of this procedure. So everyone who has sold or bought property here now gets the benefit of the extension. So it's unclear. The IRS has not invoked that revenue procedure in connection with 1031s yet, but it might. So it's something to keep an eye on as a fallback position. But for now, it's just been extended by notice, which may be extended again.
Len, just to follow up on that, we have a question from the chat box. Is the 1031 exchange extension for deals that are concluded previously also for going forward? So if you were to do a transaction today, or is it just for deals that were already done?
So it's a good question. So if you were to do a deal today, right, then your 45-day identification period would be extended to July 15th, right? So 45 days is not very long. So that would be extended. So in the sense, today's deal, right, for purposes of identification, yes, would qualify. However, you have your 180-day period. That's rather long to close on the property. So you don't really need that extension. That 180-day period is not extended. So, but you're going well beyond July 15th at this point. So hopefully you have enough time for closing on the property. So your identification period, because it falls within the April 1st, July 15th window, it's extended to July 15th. Your closing period, your closing deadline will not be extended, but hopefully, again, it doesn't need to be. Although, again, the only caveat is the IRS may extend it again by notice. So it's just something to keep an eye on.
Got it. Any other implications from even tax payments or deferments based on the CARES Act that homeowners should know of, or new homeowners?
There's no deferments. There are very few real estate favorable provisions in the CARES Act, and there are a few that really discuss it. And when they do, it tends to be in the more negative sense. So, for example, we've all heard about the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, the loans associated with that. So, for example, even though that's not necessarily to home buyers and residential, but the PPP program has carved out those developers and landlords from securing PPP loans. Right. So again, it's not meant for individuals or companies in those businesses. So that's just one mention of real estate in CARES. There are some tax-specific provisions. I don't think we want to go too far into the weeds tonight on them, but in connection with real estate businesses, there are favorable provisions. For example, the carryback of net operating losses. We might remember from the 2017 tax reform that the carryback was eliminated, and a limitation of 80% of taxable income was set up. That's gone for 18, 19, and 20. So those real estate businesses that had an NOL in those years, they can go ahead and file an amended return and get a quickie refund in connection with the applicable year. And there was a similar rule in connection with excess business losses. So this is for non-corporate taxpayers. This is for your partnerships and for your sole proprietorships. There was a limitation, again, in under tax reform in 17 that limited excess business losses, that limited business losses to $500,000 and $250,000. $500,000 for joint filers, $250,000 for single, and any excess was converted into a net operating loss that, again, could only be carried forward. Now that limitation has been eliminated under CARES through 2021. So again, 18, 19, 20, if you have business losses, there's no cap. You could use it to offset all kinds of income. If it generates an NOL, you could take it back to earlier years and get a quick refund. And another important addition, I'll just say two more things real quick. The qualified improvement property. So if you are purchasing a property and you are going to make some plumbing, electrical, drywall improvements, the depreciation period was incorrectly set at 39 years in the 2017 tax reform. Finally, it's been corrected, 3 years later to 39 years. To 15 years, pardon me. And as a result of that, you can get an additional deduction in earlier years, in 18 and 19. So you could, again, file amended returns and get a refund effectively that way as well. And I guess one other thing worth mentioning is this issue with, it's not so much a CARES issue, but just a practical issue with respect to landlords. I mean, there are some issues with landlords who are on the accrual basis as their accounting method. And of course, because of COVID, we have a lot of tenants who are not paying or who want some forbearance or delay or whatever it is. Unfortunately for those landlords, they're faced with a tricky tax issue in the sense that if they're accruing those payments, even though they don't have cash, they have income to pick up at the end of the year. So there's some tax planning that they would need to consider in connection with this rent that has accrued but has not actually been paid, because for tax purposes, they can't reverse that accrual unless the debt, so to speak, becomes worthless. So if the tenant is just unable to pay, then the landlord can kind of unaccrue the rent that it was owed. But otherwise it cannot. So landlords could be facing a hefty tax bill without cash. So that's just a tax planning point that I think bears mentioning, although it's not connected with CARES per se.
I mean, I want to pivot that to Sunny. So in the multifamily market, are the lending criteria restrictions because of, sort of insecurity around rent affecting how you finance, or for the residential 0 to 4 units, it's not effective?
No, I mean, we haven't seen any changes on that front. I mean, banks always viewed multifamilies as a bit riskier. And so, typically you would need a larger down payment or maybe even a higher credit score requirement. So that hasn't changed. It also depends on whether they're relying on the rental income to qualify or whether they can carry the mortgage without the rental income.
Got it. No, that's helpful to know. I have a quick question from the chat box I want to address, and then I want to open up to questions because we've got another 10 minutes or so. From Long, I think it applies for everyone. The question is, One Manhattan Square offers 20% discount on top of its 20-year tax credit for its condo units. Will this trigger a ripple effect for the overall condo market in Brooklyn? Great question. The honest answer is I don't know. It really depends on the kind of inventory we see, and that's part of the reasons why we as a team are keeping an active tab on a weekly absorption rate, because it really depends on how much inventory comes on. A lot of the developers who are struggling with shadow inventory may do a reduction price, and we may see that more in Manhattan. There are fewer new development projects in Brooklyn than Manhattan. So I think in terms of what we're seeing, the price negotiability, we see that greater in Manhattan. The deals are in Manhattan and have been for the last couple of years. And we kind of expect that to continue. Brooklyn is a bit of its own animal, and it does vary. One of the things we've seen is a spike up in the demand for homes, like brownstones, outdoor spaces in Brooklyn. And so the jury is out. I think it'll be an interesting 12 to 18 months ahead. But the honest answer is we don't know what the ripple effect would be, but I think it does pay to keep an active tab on it. I don't know if anybody has any further adds to that, addition to that, in terms of what we're seeing in Brooklyn versus Manhattan.
I think, Brooklyn being generally a less expensive market, there's still a flight to Brooklyn, and also just being generally more spacious. There's still, Brooklyn's still probably in some ways more in demand than Manhattan. And so I do think that, in terms of the ripple effect, yes, it'll come this way, but probably be, Brooklyn may be a little bit more insulated, but that's just my opinion.
Got it. I do want to open up for any questions. We can unmute everyone if, unless it gets, but if there's any questions, just in the interest of time, or any food for thought for all of us, because we're actually learning from each other as we go, because this is quite an unprecedented environment that we're in. Any questions people have or comments?
I have one. This is for Sunny, and I'm sure you get this question all day long, Sunny. The rates now, I saw 3%. Is that really true? Are we possibly maybe gonna go below 3? Maybe.
Yeah, in some scenarios you might be able to get that. 3, I think the banks, quite frankly, rates I think should be at that level or lower, but obviously defaults are increasing, and the banks have to make up for some of the losses that they're incurring right now. So I think the banks are probably going to hold steady, in my opinion. I don't see rates really just going down. I don't see 30-year fixed rates in the 2s and banks pretty much giving away free money when they're losing money in other sectors right now. But we are at historic lows. If 3% isn't attracting somebody, I don't know what is.
Yeah,
good point.
And actually, follow up to that, I know because we've worked with a lot of lenders. We are seeing Wells, even Chase, and some of the bigger banks actually not taking some of our applicants for new loans. You are at Citizens. So can you talk a little bit about how your firm is different and how are you still moving ahead? Because a lot of our, we've had a couple of clients shift to your bank because Wells were not taking their loans. Why is that?
Yeah, it's just a business decision that we made that we want to continue to write good loans. So while we're more stringent with our underwriting guidelines, as a bank, we just made a decision to be more stringent and more diligent about our research in underwriting the clients. But I think some of the banks, just as a bank, they just decided, that they don't want to deal with some of the headaches. The truth is, as I mentioned earlier, there are some deals that we're dealing with for 60 days and then either a customer is losing their job or guidelines are changing where loans are being pulled, and banks don't want to deal with some of the headaches that come around with that. So I'm quite baffled at some of the decisions that some banks made to really pull some of the financing, which we haven't done yet. But and that's not to say that we're not going to make decisions later on. But right now, we are still lending almost as is as far as purchase goes.
Got it. Because I know you're busy with refis, and so are some of the other lenders. Is that why some of the other folks are not taking on new loans and you are? Because I guess you never stop working, right?
Yeah, and I think a part of it is we had a huge amount of hires in the first quarter of this year. Because of refinances that we were just constantly increasing because of low rates. And I think from a capacity standpoint, we can handle it. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why we are able to continue to take the business on, whereas some of the lenders have been laying off people and we haven't at this point.
Got it. That's great to hear. So, we'll keep sending our clients your way. Any other questions or comments? We've got another 4 minutes or so. We're obviously conscious of everyone's time. Anything from our clients who are on that we haven't touched?
Reswan, if I can add just one more thing, which has been a pretty hot topic, is forbearance. Yep. People who have been, applying for forbearance and kind of the impacts, even though it might not have a negative impact on credit, it can in the future have an impact in the ability to borrow. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac recently did come out and say that they're not going to penalize customers. And for a short period, we weren't taking applications for anybody that filed for a forbearance. And, we recently did become a bit more lenient with that. But I don't think it's, 100% definitive that anybody that files for forbearance is in the clear in the future. So banks can look at that negatively. So I think, when somebody's filing for a forbearance, to really do it if it's necessary. Because there's a lot of people that are filing it just because they want to and not because they really cannot pay their mortgage.
Got it. A question then, I want to pivot to Rick and Len. So for folks who are filing for forbearance, is there, given what Sunny mentioned, is there a way to do it or a way not to do it that you recommend, or what are your feedback on that, given that banks may look at it negatively?
Forbearance in terms of what, to forbear the payments to the bank itself?
Yes.
Okay. So you could apply. I don't know how successful such strategies prove. I don't know if banks are really accepting those kinds of applications, and I don't think there's any kind of proven way to achieve success. From a tax perspective, if you're getting forbearance on your mortgage payments, then you are ostensibly not going to get the benefit of any associated deduction. But I don't think that there's been any provision, certainly not in CARES. Nothing has allowed for forbearance of those kinds of payments, and nothing has allowed for breaks in rent either. I don't know, Rick, if your experience has been different, if you've seen anything with forbearance, but I don't think there's been any success stories in getting official blessing from the IRS or anything like that about forbearing rent or mortgage payments.
I haven't seen anything. The city, I think, in the state gave some relief on that, but as you said, tax-wise, if you're not making your payments, you're not going to get deductions for them.
Right. So maybe Sonny can speak better to how banks view those kinds of requests. But from a tax perspective, there's nothing in the recently enacted laws or in previous laws that say, this is okay, and these are the ways that you can go ahead and ensure that this is okay. It really is at the discretion of the bank or the landlord, and then concomitantly, the tax consequences will flow from that kind of a decision. So,
what about the scenario that if I were to take, say, money out of my 401k for forbearance for not buying real property, but to take care of tax payments this year, and then by the end of the year I make more money and I want to, or next year want to go buy a property, would having filed or benefited from the not having the penalty on 401k based on forbearance affect my ability to get financing, Sunny, or what's?
No. Yes, I mean, so we've always allowed somebody to take money from their 401k, whether it was a withdrawal or taking a loan from it, with no impact, and that hasn't changed. I mean, most people would take a loan from their 401k instead of doing a direct withdrawal, but that hasn't changed from the past to now.
Got it. I do have a question from the chat box, and I do want to let go. I know we're going over a few minutes. The question was, how is the rental market doing from a perspective of looking for investment property, for example? The rental market is going through quite a bit of an upheaval from last year's changes in the regs. Also now, with this catastrophe, we're actually seeing, while we don't do a large rental volume, a lot of movement. So movement, for example, people not coming back to their properties, people moving out. So there's a lot of movement and happening within the rental market. In terms of the price performance, I think it is going to go down. We have a couple of rentals out there that are trending below market. And given we don't have the seasonal demand in the summer, and with other regs, we do feel like the rental market is going to get hit. The degree of which we actually don't know. But this summer, we're not going to see the summer rental market go up. We're not seeing travel. So Airbnb is really hard hit. A lot of what we're seeing from Airbnb is moving into short-term rentals. So there's probably a movement towards more shorter-term rentals, but it's an area that it really is a good unknown for us. And this summer will kind of give a better sense of how the market behaves. I mean, that's my 2 cents, but I'm happy to have the team jump in on any other thoughts on the rental market.
I think with respect to rentals and investment properties, it's always been in New York that your return on investment is really from future appreciation versus ROI on rental. The cap rates here, even before this, are maybe 4%. If you're lucky, and you're basically banking on future appreciation. So I don't think that piece has changed, but most definitely what has changed is where you look for these investment properties. You have to be a little bit more attentive, like especially with what's going on now with the rentals in general. Looking in fringe neighborhoods for that future appreciation might mean that you have to kind of take a hit on the rentals at this point in time, whereas before you could kind of stabilize that a bit. So it really is very important where you look for these rental properties, and how there's just the margins are so much lower now.
Great. We have another quick question, if I could keep you all for a few more minutes. Is there an exodus from New York City? I mean, that's a common popular question we're getting asked. We don't know. I mean, true New Yorkers love the city and we're loyal to the city, but even with our client base, we do have clients moving out of the city. We have clients who are thinking of making a move next year who are doing that. We have clients who, left town and not coming back. So I think at some level, we will see an amount of exodus from the city to the suburbs and Jersey or Westchester County. The degree, I really don't know. I think it depends on how long this continues. But we are actually even seeing within our own client base, many folks who are not coming back or moving out of the city. And I think that is likely to be a trend, the degree of it, which we don't know.
What we saw today in our Brooklyn sales meeting, we had a sales manager from up north in the Hudson Valley and Westchester, And it seems like a lot of people are renting properties, up north and also on Long Island, like where kids' camps are closed. People are looking for more space with rental properties with pools. They're creating like their own camps. So there's a little bit of this rental market that's bursting, and whether they're going to stay out there or not, to Rez's point, we don't know that.
Got it. Oh, thanks for that. Any other questions, or we don't want to keep you? We'll be doing this again. We'll have meeting notes sent out to everyone who's attended. If you don't have your emails, drop it in our chat box. I think we have everyone's email, but feel free to share.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Again, we're here, and we hope you're all safe, healthy, and be well.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Yeah.